Hey guys, it's me, Rusty, here again with more MTG content. Ever since we got Dominaria back in the spotlight of the story, all sets related to it have been associated with the idea to be absolutely filled with legends. No different with the next set, the Brothers' War. Now, the legendary creature that I decided to make this video about is not from the main set, but from the commander decks. That legend is Farid, Enterprising Salvager. Farid, Enterprising Salvager is a 2 generic and a red for a 3/3 legendary creature human soldier that reads, whenever a non-token artifact you control is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, create a colorless artifact token named Scrap. You can also pay 1 generic and 1 red, sacrifice an artifact, and choose one. You can either put a +1/+1 counter on Farid and it gains menace until end of turn. You can gold target creature, or you can discard a card, then draw a card. I'm gonna be honest, the only reason that made me choose Farid over the other legendary creatures getting spoiled is the scrap token. It literally does nothing by itself, so I wanted to see what I could do with it. To start off, one of the things that I like to do with my decks is to include at least one other creature that can be an alternate commander for the deck, in case I want to play a little bit differently each game. For this deck, one of the alternatives is Heiko Yamazaki, since I felt these two would lead to a very similar playstyle. Other options in the deck are Kurkesh, because there are a lot of artifacts with activated abilities in this deck, and Darei for the recursion and card draw. Next, before we get to the artifacts that I chose for this deck, I want to point out that the scrap generating ability of Farid doesn't care if he was the one that was responsible for the artifact getting into our yard, so it got me thinking, what other sack outlets can we put in the deck? Well, first off, we have simple ones. Orcish Vandal can turn our artifacts and scrap tokens into target removal, while Emerald Gear Smasher turns them into spread damage. Kark Clan Stoker can use them to ramp us by 2 red mana, and Ravenous Intruder can eat our scrap to become our little big threat. Even more sack outlets are Scrap Welder, that can ditch one of our biggest artifacts for a smaller one in our graveyard. Brea's Apprentice can turn our scrap tokens into cards off the top of our library, or pump one of our creatures. Audacious Reshapers reshape our scrap into other artifacts from our deck. And Makeshift Munitions can be our hard to remove sack outlet. Another card that I put in the deck is Gut, True Soul Zealot. Now, Gut didn't make an impact worth enough to be another alternative commander for this deck, but his attack trigger of turning one of our scrap tokens into a 4/1 with menace every time we attack with one or more creatures is good enough that he can make it into the deck. And for even more sacrifice incident sources we are running in this deck, we have cards like Shrapnel Blast for removal and Incendiary Sabotage for an instant speed board wipe. Trash for Treasure to trade one of our scrap tokens for an artifact in our graveyard, and Scrap Mastery to recur all of our artifacts in our graveyard. I also put Structural Assault in case we end up with a field filled with scrap tokens and don't mind losing all of our artifacts. That way, we can turn our scraps into a substantially sized board wipe, since it will count all the artifact tokens that are destroyed this way. And while we're still talking about non-creature, non-artifact spells, I put Chef's Kiss, Wild Ricochet, and Bolt Band in the deck to sort of work like counter spells of sorts. Now, with all the artifacts that this deck has, cards that benefit from their number or from their ETBs or LTBs are a given. So we have cards like creatures such as Reckless Fireweaver and Ingenious Artillerist, who can dish out damage around for each scrap and artifact we make. Shambling Suit grows its power based on the number of artifacts. And Phantom Fleet Swordjack can deal massive amount of damage to one target, or even more with its in-core ability. For non-creatures, things like Dragon Spark Reactor can become a delayed removal spell. Blinkmoth Urn can ramp us each pre-combat main phase. PS Revolution can get us back our artifacts when we sack them, lest our opponents decide to take damage to the face. and a good old Giraport Aether Grid can give us unlimited target damage as long as we have untapped artifacts. One last bit before we go over our bulk of artifacts are cards like Foundry Spectre and Joyous Familiar, both creatures that help us reduce the casting cost of our artifacts. And Trading Post, a card that can serve multiple purposes in this deck. Now, to finally go through the artifacts, we have the must-includes for this strategy. Cards like Ichor Wellspring, Mycosynthesis Wellspring, and Solemn Simulacrum that only want to enter the battlefield, do their thing, and then be sacrificed as soon as possible. Then we have more cards that work much the same in Filigree Familiar, Circuit Mender, and Workshop Assistant. We then move on to artifacts that help us ramp with lands, such as the well-known Wayfarer's Bauble, Burnished Heart, and a newer one like Navigation Orb, which even though we have no gates in the deck, it still fetches 2 basics. For mana rocks, we will use cards like Mind Stone, Commander Sphere, and Glittering Stockpile, all rocks that can sacrifice themselves and, provided we control Farid while doing so, gives us a scrap token in the process. And talking about artifacts that can sack themselves, I'm sure anybody that has been playing the game for some time knows of those limited intended use artifacts. Cards that cost generally around 1 or 2 mana and are meant to either mana fix you or to make an opponent's creature incapable to attack or block. Yeah, we're gonna use artifacts like that. Cards like Brainstone, Alchemist's Vial, Guild Globe, Sleeper Dart, Spare Supplies, Wedding Invitation, Implement of Combustion, Panic Spellbomb, Pyrite Spellbomb, Terraria, Noble's Purse, and Investigator's Journal. This last one, even though it is a rare, it is quite cheap money-wise, and depending on the board state, can become a reliable card draw source. We are also going to include cards that generate artifact tokens, just so we can always make sure we have fuel for our sack outlets. Cards like Ceremonial Knife, Gold Vein Pick, and Guild Artisan. Lastly, we're going to include more artifacts that are not really meant to be sacrificed, but are just healthy for the deck, such as Swiftfoot Boots for the all-around protection and survivability of our commander, a mana rock like Liquid Metal Tor that can allow us to turn any non-land targeted into an artifact, so we can either sacrifice it or just target it with our You Find Some Prisoners. And talking about targeting, next we have Spine of Ishsa, which even though costs a lot to cast, once we are able to do so, it will demand an answer from our opponents, should they risk to lose their permanents. And speaking of losing permanents, our last inclusion is a board wipe in the form of Nerihal's Disc, a card first printed in Alpha, but thankfully at an affordable price due to its reprints in Modern Horizons 2 and Commander Legends 2020. As for lands, we run Shrine of the Forsaken Gods, because most artifacts in this deck are colorless anyway. Buried Ruin, just so we have one more way to record an artifact, and Pyrexis Core to be another reliable source of sacrifice for us. And we cap it off with Temple of the False God and Guildless Commons for some more colorless ramp and 31 basic mountains. With all that, the deck should be coming a little bit above $21, excluding the commander. But if we want to upgrade the deck, I have some suggestions that I did not include, either because there were better options that outshined them, or because they were not budget options. Those suggestions are Scrap Heap, Darksteel Juggernaut, Mirrorworks, Gonti's Aether Heart, Summoning Station, Confusion in the Ranks, Karn, Scion of Urza, and Grinding Stone. So yeah, that was all of my suggestions for a deck dedicated to Farid, Enterprising Salvager. Since this is a mono-red deck, we don't really have ways to deal with problems besides dishing out direct damage. How I feel this deck will play is that you will try not to attract too much attention from the table, trying to bide your time and then assemble your engine for a big play. But anyways guys, that was all for this video. If you enjoyed the content and want more of it, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. And if you want to leave an opinion about the video or suggestion for another video, leave a comment down below. My name is Rusty, and I'll be seeing you guys again on the next video. Bye bye!